I'll never forget the night my brother got engaged, not because it was beautiful or emotional, but because it was the night everything came crashing down. I'm Jake, 27, and I've spent most of my life learning how to make myself smaller around people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. I wasn't the golden child. That title belonged to my older brother, Nathan. And believe me, Nathan wore that crown with pride. Ever since we were kids, our parents doted on him like he was some kind of royalty. Every achievement, every birthday, every scraped knee was treated like it deserved a parade. Meanwhile, I was just there. Not quite forgotten, but definitely optional. The thing is, I never wanted a spotlight. I didn't need confetti or trophies. I just wanted fairness, basic, human decency. But in our house, fairness was a myth, and I learned early on not to expect anything that wasn't attached to Nathan's name. He got the new clothes while I wore his hand-me-downs. He got the car for his 16th birthday. I got a bus pass. He got praise for AC+ in math, while I got silence for straight A's. And when I tried to talk to my parents about it, they said I was too sensitive or jealous. So I stopped trying. I built my own world outside of them, a world where I didn't have to measure myself against someone who would always come first. But no matter how far I tried to run, there were some things I couldn't outrun, like the medical debt that nearly buried me a few years back. At 22, I got hit with a rare autoimmune condition. Hospital visits, tests, medication, more tests. It felt like my body had declared war on itself, and I was just collateral damage. Insurance covered some of it, but not nearly enough. I was drowning in bills, trying to stay in school and keep a roof over my head while pretending I wasn't terrified every single day. I reached out to my parents once, just once. I sent them a long message explaining everything, how bad it had gotten, and how I didn't know what else to do. I asked if they could help, even just a little. I never got a reply. Nathan later told me they saw the message and thought I was being dramatic. He said, "You're smart, Jake. You'll figure it out." That was it. That was the sum total of empathy I got from my own family. So I did what I always did. I figured it out. I took on 2 jobs, cut every expense I could, and eventually paid most of it off, though not without sacrifice. I had to drop out of school for a while. I lost friends. I almost lost my apartment. And through it all, I told myself the same lie over and over. They didn't know how bad it was. But deep down, I think I always knew they just didn't care enough to find out. So when Nathan invited me to his engagement dinner 6 months ago, I wasn't exactly thrilled. But I went. Not because I cared about the celebration. Honestly, I didn't even like his fiancée all that much, but because I wanted to see them. All of them. Together. I needed to look them in the eyes. Maybe part of me still hoped I'd finally get an explanation. Or maybe I just wanted closure. Either way, I showed up. The dinner was at a fancy Italian place downtown. White tablecloths, wine that tasted like it came from a magazine ad, and the kind of menu where you needed a translator app just to order. Nathan was in his element, of course, shaking hands, making toasts, acting like he was the groom at a royal wedding. Mom was glowing, hanging on to his every word. Dad was all proud smiles, laughing too loudly at Nathan's jokes. And me? I sat at the far end of the table, 3 seats away from the nearest conversation, sipping water and waiting for someone, anyone, to ask how I'd been. No one did. We were halfway through dinner when Mom leaned over and said, "Isn't this nice, Jake? It's good to have the whole family together again." I gave her a tight smile and nodded. It wasn't nice. It was surreal. Like watching a movie where you're in the scene, but no one can see you. Later, as the plates were cleared and someone ordered another bottle of overpriced wine, Dad raised his glass and toasted to family. That's when something in me snapped, not in a loud, dramatic way, but in a quiet, final way. The kind of snap you don't hear until everything around it starts to unravel. I set my glass down and cleared my throat. "Hey, quick question," I said, as casually as I could. "Do you guys remember when I got sick a few years ago? Like really sick?" The table quieted a bit. Dad tilted his head, squinting like he was trying to place a distant memory. Mom froze, still holding her fork midair. Nathan looked up from his phone. "Of course," Dad said eventually, his voice light. "Why?" I remember reaching out for help. I continued, my voice steady. And I never got a response. I figured maybe you didn't see the message. But now that we're all here, I'm just wondering, why didn't you help? There was a beat of silence. Then Dad chuckled. Actually chuckled. He leaned back in his chair like I'd just asked why we didn't buy name-brand cereal growing up. We thought your brother's wedding would be more important, he said, grinning like it was a harmless joke. The table erupted into awkward laughter, everyone except me. I didn't laugh. I didn't move. I just stared at him. More important. Those two words echoed in my head like a slap. Not, we couldn't afford it. Not, we didn't know how bad it was. Just, more important. That's when I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder. I hadn't planned on doing this. Not really. I brought the folder out of instinct, like a safety net I didn't think I'd need. But the moment those words left his mouth, I knew exactly why I'd brought it. I laid it gently on the table in front of me. Thick, worn, crammed with printed statements, medical records, insurance denials, photos of the hospital bed I called home for nearly 3 months. A timeline of everything they chose to ignore. You might want to read this before dessert, I said, voice low. Dad's smile faltered. Mom's fork clinked against her plate. Nathan finally looked up from his phone. Their faces said everything. And that's when I knew I wasn't done yet. Nathan reached out first. His hand brushed the edge of the folder like he wasn't sure if it might bite him. His fiancée, Rachel, leaned over his shoulder, squinting at the contents with a wrinkle in her nose, like it was something unpleasant she hadn't expected to deal with tonight. Maybe a stray piece of spinach on the tablecloth, or a whiff of something rotten. I watched them flip through the first few pages. Hospital admission forms, billing statements with balance amounts in the thousands, denial letters from insurance companies, all with my name on them. All dated over a period of 14 brutal months. Mom didn't move. Her wine glass hung limply from her fingers. Dad was still trying to keep the smile on his face, like he thought if he smiled long enough, this would turn into a joke. Like maybe I was going to yell gotcha and laugh it off. But I didn't. I sat still and waited. Nathan's face changed first. The smugness dropped. His brow furrowed, and he leaned in, flipping another few pages. He didn't say anything. He just looked confused. Then he turned to Mom. Did you guys seriously ignore all this? He asked, holding up a sheet with a $9,800 balance, due stamp circled in red. She didn't answer. She just blinked. Then she reached out, took the folder from him, and started flipping through it herself, her lips tightening with every page. I sent you everything, I said. The first bill, the diagnosis, even the letter from the hospital threatening to send me to collections. You saw it. You just didn't care. Dad scoffed and waved a hand. Jake, you're being dramatic again. You always do this, bringing up the past. This is your brother's big night, and you want to make it about you? I blinked. I'd been expecting deflection, but not that fast. You made it about him, I said, my voice colder than I expected. Every single time. When I was lying in a hospital bed, throwing up blood, you were buying Nathan a new suit for a job interview. When I got discharged with barely enough money to pay rent, you were helping Nathan and Rachel put down a deposit on a condo. When I was begging you for help, you didn't even reply. And now you're telling me I'm making it about me. You should have been more responsible, Dad said, shrugging like this was a casual conversation and not my breaking point. You could have taken out better insurance. You could have. I was a college student with part-time income and an autoimmune disease. I cut in. You think I wanted to get sick? That shut him up. For a second. Then Mom finally found her voice. Jake, you don't understand how hard it is to split things fairly, she said, carefully setting the folder down like it was some sort of toxic substance. We had to prioritize. Prioritize. I repeated. So, not just ignore. You chose not to help me. We were trying to keep the family from falling apart, she continued, her voice taking on that soft, patronizing tone she always used when she wanted to end an argument without answering for anything. Nathan had just gotten engaged. It was a huge milestone. We couldn't exactly. So my health didn't count as a milestone? I said, leaning forward. Is that what we're saying here? I should have gotten a ring instead of a diagnosis. Her mouth snapped shut. Rachel leaned closer to Nathan and whispered something, but I caught a few words. Why didn't you tell me? Nathan gave her a helpless look. I didn't know it was this bad. No, you didn't, I said, turning to him. Because you never asked. You were busy letting Mom and Dad bankroll your new life while I was rationing my medication. He had the decency to look guilty, but not guilty enough to say anything meaningful. Dad stood up. His chair scraped loudly against the floor. His voice came out louder than necessary, clearly trying to reclaim authority. All right, This conversation's done. We're not airing dirty laundry at a restaurant. I'm not going to sit here and be disrespected like this. Funny, I said, standing up as well. That's how I felt for the last 5 years. A few heads turned from nearby tables. The waiter hovering near the bar took a cautious step back. No one at our table moved. I picked up the folder and tucked it back into my bag. The silence was thick, uncomfortable, like everyone was waiting for someone else to fix it. That's when Nathan said the one thing that truly broke me. Jake, come on. They helped when it mattered. I turned to him slowly. When it mattered? Look, I'm not saying what they did was right, he said, hands raised, trying to smooth things over. But it's not like your situation was permanent. I mean, you got through it, didn't you? I felt something go hollow inside me. Yeah, I said, my voice nearly a whisper. I got through it. Alone. And then I sat back down. Not because I wanted to stay, but because I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of watching me walk away like I was the problem. I wanted them to squirm. I wanted them to sit in it. Rachel pushed her plate away. Nathan looked like he was suddenly very interested in the pattern on the tablecloth. My parents kept their eyes on their wine glasses. For the rest of the meal, no one spoke to me. And I didn't speak to them. But something shifted that night. A crack in the foundation they thought would always hold. And I wasn't done yet. The days after the dinner were a strange blur of passive-aggressive texts, silence, and one-word replies from my parents. Nathan didn't reach out at all, and neither did Rachel. I half expected a call from my mom the next day to smooth things over. She was the type who hated conflict unless she was controlling it. But nothing came. Instead, 2 days later, I got a message from my aunt, my dad's sister, asking if I was okay. I hadn't spoken to her in a while, not out of animosity, just distance. She'd always been the odd one out in the family, more grounded, less performative. She'd seen the fallout at the dinner secondhand through the family grapevine, and she wanted to hear my side. So I told her everything. When I finished, she was quiet for a few seconds. Then she said, Jake, I knew they favored Nathan, but I didn't know it was this bad. That's unforgivable. And then she told me something I didn't know. Apparently, my parents did have the money to help. Not just scraping by money. They had access to a sizable inheritance from my late grandfather. Money that had been divided between the siblings with the intention that it be used for family emergencies. Each sibling had control over their own share. My father? He'd used some of his to help Nathan with the condo and the engagement ring. The rest was still sitting in an account. When I asked why I wasn't told about this sooner, my aunt said quietly, because your father didn't tell anyone you asked for help. We only found out after what happened at the dinner. That's when the last piece clicked into place. This wasn't just negligence. It was intentional. I hung up, heart pounding, a new kind of fire building inside me. This wasn't just favoritism anymore. This was betrayal. Calculated. Chosen. They had chosen to watch me suffer. And now I had to decide what to do with that. When I hung up the phone with my aunt, I sat there for a long time, just staring at the wall of my apartment. My apartment wasn't much, small, 1 bedroom, drafty windows, but it was mine. I'd fought like hell to keep it during the worst of the medical storm. I'd eaten rice and eggs for weeks at a time to afford rent. I'd skipped medications, sold my gaming setup, and even pawned my watch, my graduation gift from a high school teacher, not my parents, to scrape by. I used to sit on that exact couch and convince myself that someday, things would even out. That the imbalance was just temporary. That my parents had to come around eventually. That maybe, just maybe, I mattered to them, even if they didn't show it in the same way. But now I had proof. Proof that they saw my pain, weighed it against my brother's engagement ring, and chose the sparkle. I think there's a very specific kind of silence that comes after betrayal. It's not dramatic. It's not loud or angry. It's the kind of quiet that sinks into your bones. Heavy. Cold. Still. For a few days, I didn't speak to anyone. I didn't respond to texts from coworkers. I ghosted my group chat. I even ignored my aunt when she followed up with just checking in, thinking of you. I wasn't depressed. I was empty. But somewhere in that silence, a thought kept repeating itself like a whisper I couldn't shake. You made it without them. You survived. And it was true. Not because they helped. Not because they supported me. I survived because I refused to disappear. I clawed my way out of something they didn't even bother to look at. I still remember the night I finally snapped out of it. I was making dinner, just some pasta and frozen vegetables, and I opened the cabinet and found the last can of soup from the stash I kept during the worst of my health problems. A dented can of lentil soup, the label half peeled off, expiration date barely a month away. I stared at it. That soup had once been a lifeline, a backup plan when money was gone and options were limited. Now it was just a can of soup. I smiled. Something in me clicked. I'd already rebuilt once, without support, without guidance, without a safety net. What was stopping me now from building something better? Not just survival, not just scraping by, thriving. The next morning, I made a list. It wasn't anything fancy, just a list on a yellow legal pad with 3 columns. Things I want to let go of. Things I need to do. Things I want for myself. The first list filled up quickly. Resentment. Waiting for apologies. The hope that one day they'd treat me fairly. The second list took more time, but it grounded me. File for financial aid again and finish my degree. Pick up more freelance work. Fix my LinkedIn. Start therapy. And the third list? That one surprised me the most. I wanted a place with sunlight. I wanted to cook meals that weren't just for survival. I wanted to walk into a room and not flinch when someone raised their voice. I wanted peace. I taped the list to my fridge. And then I got to work. The first thing I did was call my university. I hadn't been enrolled in over 2 years, but they still had my credits on file. The academic advisor I spoke with was kind and efficient. She walked me through the re-enrollment process and even told me about a new grant program for returning students in financial recovery. I qualified. 2 weeks later, I was back in school, part-time at first, just one class to ease back in, but I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Momentum. Then I doubled down on my freelance work. I'd been doing odd tech gigs here and there, mostly web design, some digital marketing for small businesses, but I'd never treated it seriously. I always assumed it was temporary. Now, I treated it like a business. I redid my portfolio. I reached out to old clients. I offered package deals and referral discounts. Within a month, I had a steady rotation of projects. Within 3 months, I was making more from freelancing than I had working full-time at the retail job I'd taken to make ends meet. It wasn't flashy. I didn't post about it on social media. I didn't announce my grind to the world. I just built. Quietly. Steadily. And the more I built, the more I noticed something strange. My health got better. Not in a magical way. I still had the condition, still took my meds, still had off days. But the stress, the exhaustion, the sense of drowning, it started to lift. My energy came back. I started sleeping through the night. My appetite returned. Therapy helped too. I found someone who specialized in family trauma and complex grief. I didn't even know grief applied to me until my therapist pointed it out. You're grieving the version of your parents you thought you had, she said. The version you hoped existed. That's real. And it's okay to grieve it, even if they're still alive. That hit harder than I expected. Week by week, I unpacked it all. The childhood disappointments, the chronic comparisons, the silence, the casual cruelty disguised as tough love. And slowly, I started to let go of the lie that it was my fault. My parents didn't fail me because I was too sensitive. They failed me because they chose to. That kind of realization doesn't bring relief, not at first. It brings grief, then anger, then, finally, freedom. A few months later, I got a call from Nathan. He hadn't reached out since the dinner. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. Hey, Jake, he said, his voice careful. Got a minute? Not really, I said honest. But go ahead. He paused. So, Rachel and I are planning the wedding. And Mom and Dad said you're not talking to them. And now they're saying they're not sure if they want to do the family photos if you're not in them. And it's turning into this whole thing. I raised an eyebrow, even though he couldn't see me. So they care about appearances again. Shocking. Look, man, I get you're upset. No, you don't, I said, cutting him off. You don't get it. You've never had to get it. He sighed. I'm not trying to fight. Then what are you trying to do? I guess. I don't know. Keep the peace. That made me laugh. I couldn't help it. Nate, there is no peace. There's just a pile of broken trust that everyone's trying to throw a tablecloth over. And I'm not doing that anymore. He was quiet. After a moment, he said, So you're not coming? I didn't answer right away. Then, I haven't decided. And I hung up. I felt no guilt. No dread. Just space. Space to decide what I wanted, not what they expected. By the time spring rolled around, I was in a different place. Emotionally, financially, mentally. I had a new client, a growing startup that needed ongoing design work. I'd aced my class and signed up for 2 more. My savings account was the healthiest it had ever been. And my therapist looked at me during one of our sessions and said, "You're not surviving anymore, Jake. You're living." I believed her. Still, there was one thing left that I hadn't decided on. The wedding. It was coming up fast, just under 2 months away. I hadn't RSVP'd. I hadn't spoken to my parents since the dinner. Nathan sent one more message, something half-hearted like, "Hope you can make it. Rachel's asking about table numbers." But the truth was, I wasn't sure I wanted to go. Not because I was angry, because I was done. Done playing a role in a family that only saw me when it was convenient. Done sitting at tables where I had to fight for scraps of basic decency. But then, something happened. Something that changed everything again. And this time, it wasn't a choice. It was a letter. A legal letter. And when I opened it, I felt my stomach drop. Because what it said, well, let's just say the wedding wasn't going to be the only thing happening that weekend. It arrived on a Tuesday morning, tucked between a grocery coupon booklet and a late water bill. A plain white envelope, stiff and official, with my full name typed cleanly in the center and no return address. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe a delayed medical notice or a credit offer from a bank I'd never heard of. But the moment I tore it open and scanned the first few lines, my fingers went cold. It was from an attorney. The letterhead read Kirkland & Associates, Estate Planning and Probate. And just below that, in sharp serif font, was a sentence that changed everything. This notice pertains to the final estate wishes of Charles R. Langston, deceased, and the disbursement of assets as stipulated in the amended will dated March 5, 2017. My grandfather. I hadn't thought about Grandpa Charles in years. He died just before I started college. A quiet, stoic man who mostly kept to himself, but always had a kind word for me when we visited. I remember him slipping me a $50 bill on Christmas Eve once, just to see me smile. My parents always said he was old-fashioned and a bit too soft on Jake. I never asked what they meant by that. But now, 6 years after his death, I was getting a letter from his estate lawyer. I sat down at the kitchen table and read the whole thing twice. It turned out Grandpa Charles had made a quiet amendment to his will shortly before his passing. Apparently, he'd grown wary of how my parents favored Nathan. According to the letter, he'd even expressed grave concerns that my father would misuse his share of the inheritance. So, unbeknownst to the rest of the family, he set aside a separate account, one earmarked specifically for me. A trust. It wasn't massive, not some hidden fortune, but it was enough. Enough to change things. There was a clause, though. The funds would be accessible only upon one of 3 conditions. My graduation from college. Proof of financial hardship directly tied to a medical event. Written request for early access in cases of exceptional familial neglect. The lawyer's letter stated they'd just become aware of my recent situation through my aunt, my dad's sister, Carol. She had apparently shared my story after our phone call. The firm had reviewed the case and deemed the 3rd condition met. All that was needed now was for me to sign a few documents and verify my identity. I would have full access to the trust in 30 days. The funds would be deposited into a new account, outside of my parents' reach. I sat there in stunned silence, staring at the letter, heart pounding. He'd known. All those years ago, before the hospital stays, before the silence, before the folder on the dinner table, he saw it coming. Somehow, he saw what they were doing to me, what they would do, and he made a plan. I don't remember standing up, but I found myself pacing my apartment in slow circles, the letter still clutched in my hand. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just planned. Because if Grandpa Charles had faith in me enough to protect me from beyond the grave, I wasn't going to waste that. For the first time in my life, I had leverage, and I was going to use it. I started small, quiet, subtle. First, I called Aunt Carol. She answered on the first ring. "Jake," she said, her voice calm. "I was hoping you'd call. You sent the letter?" I told them your story. They did the rest. I paused. "Thank you." "You don't owe me thanks," she replied. "You deserve to be seen. And it's time someone in this family finally saw you." We spoke for over an hour. She filled in more gaps, things I hadn't known. Like how my father had lied about me dropping out of school, telling relatives I was lazy and couldn't handle responsibility. Or how he framed my medical issues as exaggerated and told people I was milking the sympathy card. He said all of this while funneling thousands into Nathan's lifestyle. "I never believed him," she said. "But I didn't know how bad it was until you told me." By the end of the call, I had something better than just an inheritance. I had an ally. And Aunt Carol? She had receipts, emails, text messages, voicemails my father had left her over the years, full of bragging, dismissive remarks about me, and even one where he laughed about using Jake's sob story to get a tax write-off for donating to a charity. Wait, what charity? I asked. She hesitated. Some medical fund he said was yours. But I think he just used your name on the paperwork. I froze. Do you have any documentation? She did. She sent it. And there it was, my name, listed as a recipient of a $5,000 charitable gift my father claimed on his taxes. I had never seen a dime of it. That changed things. Dramatically. I forwarded the documents to the lawyer from the estate and asked if there were legal options. He responded within hours. What my father had done wasn't just immoral, it bordered on fraud. Tax fraud, to be specific. If you want to pursue this, the lawyer wrote, you have more than enough grounds to file a claim. I wasn't sure yet if I wanted to go that far, but I filed the email away in a folder titled Options. Meanwhile, the wedding was fast approaching. Rachel had finally messaged me herself, probably tired of Nathan's silence, and asked if I'd RSVP soon. She wrote in that polite, performative way people do when they're trying to avoid confrontation. Hope you've been well, Jake. It would mean a lot to Nathan if you were there. He's stressed with all the planning, but we're trying to keep things light. Let us know if you'll be attending. I didn't reply. Instead, I started gathering more information. Carol wasn't the only family member who'd seen through the cracks. Over the next few weeks, I reached out to cousins, old family friends, even one of my mom's former co-workers. I asked quiet questions. I let them speak freely. And what I learned, it painted a damning picture. My parents had spent years curating a false narrative. To outsiders, they were doting parents with one son who struggled and another who made them proud. They told everyone I was always in trouble, always irresponsible, always looking for handouts. But in truth, I'd never borrowed money from them, never asked for gifts, never caused a scene. I just wasn't Nathan. That was my crime. And now I had the truth. I had their lies exposed, their secrets recorded, their good parent mask cracking. But I needed one last thing. A moment. The right moment. And it was coming. I learned from Rachel's Instagram that the rehearsal dinner would take place the night before the wedding, at the same venue they'd used for the engagement dinner. Classy, over the top, overpriced. Rachel had posted a story with the caption, "Can't believe it's almost here. Final touches for the dinner tonight." It was public. They expected me to come, so I decided I would. But not alone. I asked Aunt Carol if she'd come with me. Not just as support, but as backup. She agreed without hesitation. I didn't tell her everything. Not yet. Just that I wanted to say a few words. That I needed someone in my corner in case things got ugly. She said, "I've got your back. No matter what happens." I smiled. That's good. Because I'm not just showing up for dinner. She tilted her head. Then what are you showing up for? I opened my laptop. On the screen were 3 tabs. The lawyer's email detailing the trust. A drafted public letter to my family, outlining the truth. The PDF tax record of the fraudulent donation. I turned the screen toward her. She stared at it for a long time. Then she looked at me. And she smiled. Let's burn it all down. The night of the rehearsal dinner was warm, with a thick kind of summer humidity that clung to your skin no matter how slowly you moved. The restaurant was exactly as I remembered it. White tablecloths, ambient lighting, waiters in black vests and bow ties, and a view of the city skyline that probably added 30% to the bill. It was a place meant to impress, not to feel like home. I wore a navy suit, clean lines, tailored, subtle. Not flashy, but sharp enough to show I wasn't the same kid from before. Aunt Carol arrived a few minutes after I did, in a dark green dress and a pair of silver earrings I remembered from my childhood. She used to wear them on holidays when she was feeling bold. She nodded to me, silent but ready. The hostess recognized me and ushered us toward the private room without hesitation. And just like that, I was back at the long table, the same one from 6 months earlier. Except this time, I wasn't sitting at the end, quietly sipping water, waiting to be noticed. This time, they noticed me immediately. Nathan did a double take mid-conversation. Rachel's smile stiffened when she saw Carol beside me. My parents exchanged a look, a subtle flicker of something behind their eyes. Panic? Discomfort? They recovered quickly. Dad stood. "Jake," he said, forcing a smile. "Glad you could make it." Mom chimed in. "It's so nice to see you. We weren't sure you'd come." "I wouldn't miss it," I said. This is a family celebration, right? Nathan stepped forward, holding a drink, his voice unsure. Hey man, you look good. You too, I said evenly. Big weekend. Rachel smiled tightly. We've got speeches tonight, so we're keeping it light. No drama, yeah? Of course, I said. Wouldn't dream of causing a scene. She relaxed slightly, missing the edge in my tone. We sat down. Carol and I took seats close to the middle of the table this time. Conversation resumed, a bit stilted, but steady. Toasts were made, laughter was shared, and champagne glasses clinked. But I watched it all from a distance. Like a guest at a play, I already knew the ending too. When the main course was cleared, Rachel stood and tapped her glass. All right, everyone. Before dessert, we thought it'd be nice to share a few words. Just some thoughts about family, love, and this new chapter. She gestured to Nathan, who rose and gave a short, nervous speech about partnership and gratitude. It was standard fare, well-meaning, a little awkward, but sincere. People clapped politely. He sat down and gave Rachel a nod. She smiled and turned to the group. And now, Jake has something he'd like to share. There was a beat of confusion. My parents froze. Nathan blinked. Rachel looked back at me with an overly bright expression, the kind people wear when they're pretending not to be terrified. She didn't know I had planned to speak, but she assumed I'd behave. I stood up slowly and adjusted my jacket. Thanks, Rachel. I'll keep it brief. I turned to face the table fully. All eyes on me now. The room had gone quiet. I've spent the last few months thinking a lot about family. I began. About what it means, what it doesn't mean, and what people are willing to do for the people they claim to love. Mom shifted in her seat. Dad's jaw tightened. When I got sick a few years ago, I thought that was my rock bottom. But it wasn't the illness that broke me. It was the silence. The abandonment. Being treated like an inconvenience while I was fighting to survive. A few people exchanged glances. Rachel looked confused. Nathan looked uncomfortable. I reached out to my parents for help. They ignored me. I begged. I got nothing. Meanwhile, they funded an engagement ring, a condo, and this dinner. And I stayed silent for years, thinking maybe it was my fault. Maybe I just didn't deserve help. Now the room was holding its breath. But then I found out something interesting. I reached into my jacket and pulled out a folder, sleeker than before, no frayed corners this time. I opened it and slid out a page, holding it up. This is a copy of a tax filing from 2 years ago. It shows a $5,000 charitable donation made in my name. My father claimed it was to help cover my medical bills. I never saw that money. Never even knew it existed. But it sure helped him come tax season. A few people gasped quietly. Nathan's face drained of color. That's fraud, I said simply. Not just morally, but legally. And I have the documents to prove it. Dad stood up, face red. Jake, I'm not finished, I said, my voice calm. Please sit down. He hesitated, then slowly lowered himself back into his seat. I also have something else, I continued, pulling out a second document. A letter from my grandfather's estate lawyer. Turns out, he left me a trust. One that could only be accessed under very specific circumstances. One of which was, quote, exceptional familial neglect. I paused. After reviewing everything, the lawyers agreed. The trust has been released. I now have full control of the funds. Rachel's eyes widened. Nathan looked like he'd just swallowed a nail. I'm telling you all this, I said, because I'm done pretending. Done being the quiet one. Done being treated like I don't exist unless someone needs something. I turned to Rachel. I wish you and Nathan the best. Truly. But I won't be attending your wedding. I turned to my parents. And as for you, I've already filed a report with the IRS. You'll be hearing from them soon. You stole from me, and now you'll face the consequences. Mom covered her mouth. Dad opened and closed his mouth, but couldn't form words. I looked around the table, locking eyes with each person. This isn't about revenge. It's about truth and peace and claiming the space I should have had all along. I nodded to Aunt Carol, then turned and walked out. No one followed. It didn't take long for the fallout to begin. A week later, my parents were contacted by the IRS. Aunt Carol confirmed it through the family grapevine. There were audits, phone calls, mounting legal fees. My father tried to spin it, said I was misinformed, but the documents spoke for themselves. The tax fraud charge stuck. They were fined, publicly embarrassed, and forced to repay the amount, with interest. My mother tried to reach out once, a clumsy email filled with half apologies and veiled accusations. I didn't respond. Nathan and Rachel still had their wedding, but I heard through the grapevine it was awkward. Tense. Several relatives skipped it altogether. The photos looked stiff, the smiles forced. I didn't gloat. I just moved on. The trust allowed me to pay off my remaining medical debt. I finished school, launched my own design firm, and moved into a sunlit apartment across town. High ceilings, plants in every corner, and a kitchen I actually liked being in. Carol and I grew closer. She came over on Sundays for dinner. Sometimes we talked about the past. Sometimes we didn't. But she never once made me feel invisible. And me? I stopped waiting for an apology that was never coming. I stopped trying to fix a family that had never once tried to fix me. Because sometimes, the most powerful revenge isn't rage or cruelty. It's becoming everything they said you couldn't be, without needing them at all. And that's exactly what I did.